Hi, Javier Orozco, introducing now the second part of the impact assessment within smart sustainable cities and the built environment. Up to now, we have introduced the theoretical background, understood the principles, how different help from materials and installations can help in the process. Now that we have seen how the different planes for sustainability are interacting in a very complex way, we need to go through and take a look at the impact assessment, the measurable objective notes we can take on sustainability. First, we have to understand the main topics for the assessment. One is related to mobility within cities, sustainable urban mobility. Second is the districts and the built environment, actually the hardware, the city itself, and then the infrastructure and processes and things that are happening within the city. Mobility, people and their activities, and the hardware, the buildings. For all of them, we have different transversal points of view, transversal evaluations on how the decisions are made, what's the insight we can get on the sustainability planes, and finally, how to get funds for all of the work being done. From the point of view on decisions, there are obviously different levels. The integrated planning, connected to the policy and regulation, which is the duty of the authorities, and then the citizen focus, which is becoming increasingly important for the decision within cities. Within the insight for making all the decisions, obviously we should start with standards for obtaining data, which should be open and shared. The data should respond to the different metrics and indicators, and finally, for managing all this information, we need to share the knowledge within certain limitations and possibilities that we will introduce later. And last but not least are the funds. How are we going to finance any changes, any activities within the sustainable city? For that, we need to understand the processes through business models, then taxes, procurement, funding possibilities, projects, and that's the last point, which will close the circle of our analysis of the real sustainability and the impact of our decisions. For starting, for us starters, we'll take a look at data. Obviously, at the root of everything, we need information to go forward and analyze whatever we want to do. For that, we should start by understanding how data is connected to important points. Within the city, we need data on waste, on climate conditions, air quality, transport, the infrastructure network and data network, and other activities that should provide information. This information is handled through the different analytic systems, monitoring systems that allow a visualization and allow to elaborate this information in something that can help to the data management, which again has several different points of view, and also this process will help within the city itself or by third parties that will come and exchange information, help us on taking our notes and using our information later. So this is the structure on how the information is flowing. But information should be directed towards different objectives. Before we have a data plan, we have to understand what we need the data for. Typically, in every city nowadays is focused on the Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations. There are 17 of them. You have the complete layout here, and through the link that you see down in the slide, you will be able to understand and to get a detail on all of them. The information gathered for making progress for assessing these objectives is based on data which obviously has to be discoverable. I mean, we should be able to look through the information. The measurements have to proceed with different standards and have to be accessed from some different points of view. They have to be comparable. Again, we should encourage people to use the data through the appropriate organization with an easy access and connecting all the different elements to documents and tools which are needed for handling that. So, provided that we're fulfilling all these requirements on the data gathering for the objectives, we have to measure individual instances, which are the performance indicators for the different objectives. There's a full range of them, which are to be selected according to the type of city, according to the necessities of the city, according to what we want to achieve, and what's our final aim on the policy, on the activities that we're going to perform for a sustainable city. So let's begin with the standards. The standards are applied at different levels. First, as a technical specification for gathering data. Second, as a process for merging data and for elaborating all the data into aggregate information that can be handled for the first level, which is the strategic decision making. There are very different sets of standards, but the role of these standards is obvious, is to ensure that when we have a figure following a certain path through the standards, it's comparable, and we can be sure that the actual numbers can be compared directly one to another. So this is very important. At the top, for the decision making, we have the ISO 37120, which is adopted by a set of cities and presented on the website that you see the link below, dataforcities.org. Here you have a small presentation of most of the city which have adopted this standard and which are sharing all the information according to the different standards and levels of evaluation from health, security, climate. There are a complete set of standards. Not all the cities are following all the standards, but it's important that whenever a city is adopting this standard and has selected a certain parameter, you can check the same figures for all the different cities. A further development onto that is the way we can compare cities in order to establish a ranking. Here, in this standard, there's a certain aggregation of the different figures in order to establish some points and which cities are the top ranking onto sustainability. But this is only one approach. Obviously, it's depending on the final decision on how to combine all these together. Another approach, another way of aggregating the information is establishing key performance indicators, because the ISO 37000 is very focused onto the Sustainable Development Goals and related things, but for managing cities, in most of the time we need further more detailed information, especially related to natural parameters and the impact on nature of all these parameters, which most of the time are missing on the other standards. For that, we have selected, or we suggest that you could use the Eclipse set of frameworks of key performance indicators, which can be found on the links provided there. Eclipse comes from a European project where different stakeholders within Europe, including universities, cities, and many other participants or stakeholders, decided on what are the main measurements to take to monitor and how to aggregate them into key performance indicators related to natural development in most cases. An example of the aggregation of all this information has been done in the city of Valencia. You can check this website where not only the data for the ISO 37000 is presented graphically within a geographical information system, a GIS system, where the intake, the monitoring point, the origin of the data is pinpointed within a map, a geographical system, and then you can download from there the whole set of data that has been recorded over time. This is a very nice way and very easy access to how to aggregate all the information, and it's only for presenting data, but allows easy management and understanding of the whole evolution of the data in the city and how it can be discovered for making further analysis. A specific set within this approach has been made in the European project Grow Green, where we focused on the impact of several pilots. You can see through the link also a presentation on a GIS system, ArcGIS in this case, taking into account the KPIs related to the impact of this green infrastructure through the pilots in the different areas. The purpose of this application is to make comparable assessment of the different or similar pilots in different cities for taking decisions onto the deployment of these solutions. Once we have the data, we have to be able to handle it into a joint evaluation for assessment. So we start with data from sensors. The data from sensors are the monitoring system, different electronics, or even service. All the information is handled taken into a database. The database then is presented, as we said, through a geographical information system and can be used for different purposes. Only for graphical evaluation, second for a mathematical analysis of the situation, for the interpolation of evolution when we don't have data. For that we have something like the finite difference technique from NBMet, or the extrapolation of this data into the future following some trends. All these mathematical models are providing us typically an basic understanding of the interpolation, but it's also important that they can provide an overview into the future, which mathematically is a little bit dangerous. This extrapolation is normally not a good way of measuring anything, because you can never be sure what will happen in the future. So for providing a continuous and thorough analysis of the interinfluence of all that, we propose the technique, the statistical technique, data envelopment analysis, which is introduced on the right of this slide. Through this data envelopment analysis, what we do is taking all the measurements through time, considering some variables as inputs, those which we in some ways can control, and we can provide changes to, and second are the outputs, which are the results which are desirable within our sustainable policy. Obviously, you have to take priorities, you have to determine a policy and to set your standards in order to make any assessment. Through that, we take into account, thanks to this statistical technique, the interaction in the past and the projection to the future. We can even try to project all the information from the past through a simulation of the specific results that can be obtained through the pilots into the future. So this combined projection and background assessment of the different interactions, we don't know in detail. We can have a mathematical model for that, can provide a realistic impact assessment for the whole setup. Let's see things in detail. For example, our combined assessment framework is the geographical information of the city and presenting the monitoring data which are shown here. Second, we can provide even more information through a widespread area from LIDAR data, for example, LIDAR open data shown here, the Copernicus climate services or mirror services, onto climatic variables which are also needed to support expected projections of data or for more detailed information in bigger areas where we don't have the detailed monitoring of the data. And the final analysis is then taken through the data envelopment analysis. This is all I wanted to say to conclude our impact assessment of city. Thank you very much.